Hey, what's up guys, it's Matt with the Movement System. In this video, we're gonna talk about strength and hypertrophy training for athletes. Whether you're an endurance athlete like me or you're an NFL football player, some amount of strength and hypertrophy training is going to play a role in your preparation for your sport. We're gonna talk about the three-phase approach that I've developed to help my athletes improve their strength and hypertrophy for their sport. Let's go ahead and dive into it. All right, so let's lay out the foundation of what this three-phase approach is and then talk about who it's good for. Phase one of the approach is the hypertrophy phase. This is going to be the highest volume of training, and this typically corresponds to more of the off-season time period for athletes. Phase two of the approach is the strength phase. This is where we're going to drop the volume down a little bit. We'll talk about exactly how much to drop it in a minute, but this is going to be a more moderate volume approach where we're focusing on load on the barbell. And then finally, phase three is our undulating approach. This is where we're going to be training power, strength, and hypertrophy all within the same training block. This can be an incredibly effective technique for a lot of sport athletes who need to maintain a bunch of different adaptations throughout their season of training. I'm going to show you guys some concrete examples of exactly how I've applied this to programming, but then you can apply these techniques with your own style and your own exercise choice for your own athletes as well. All right, let's go ahead and start off with phase number one, the hypertrophy phase. Depending on the athlete, you may need more or less of this. If you're an endurance athlete like myself, you may only do this 1 or 2 months out of the entire year because it's not really a primary adaptation you need for your sport. If you're an undersized high school football player, you may be trying to have at least 10 months out of the year where you're really focused on building muscle hypertrophy and building the lean body mass that you need to compete at the next level. Broadly speaking, you can think of the hypertrophy phase as the phase where you're preparing the athlete to handle a large volume of workload. This means that you're putting a lot of training volume on their muscles and their tendons, and you're putting that all on them with general stress, meaning general exercises. These could be lunges and leg press and squats and deadlifts, with the primary goal to build muscle mass and not necessarily in a sport-specific way. In fact, if you go too sport-specific in this phase, you actually could miss out on some of the base physiological adaptations that they need to get stronger and bigger. For example, you've probably seen that high school football player who's just too small to play their position, and they're just doing ladder drills and agility work and lateral lunges with 10 pounds in their hands, and they're not really getting stronger from year to year. That could limit them from being able to play at the next level. If instead they take the approach of just doing big compound lifts and getting bigger from year to year, that may help them with their sport more. Okay, so we've said that we want high volume training, but what does that actually mean and what does that actually look like? I typically consider high volume training about 15 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And these are hard working sets. So for example, if we're thinking about our chest muscles and we're trying to get bigger, more hypertrophy chest muscles, then we're probably gonna want to target at least 15 hard working pressing sets per week. This is based on both the research around training volume and my experience working with a lot of athletes. That could be divided up however you want to. If you have 3 days where you're doing pushing, for example, 2 upper body days and 1 full body training day, then you may divide it up like this. 6 heavy working sets of pressing on both of your upper body days. Maybe that's 3 sets of bench press, 2 sets of incline bench press, and another 3 to 5 sets on your full body training day. If those are true hard working sets, then that is a high volume stimulus. If you're doing 50 sets a week, you're probably doing junk volume. I will say though that my research and experience is all on non-enhanced lifters, so if you are an enhanced bodybuilder, you could probably push even beyond 20 hard sets per week. This same strategy though can be applied to multiple different muscle groups. If you want to focus on hypertrophy for your quads, you can choose front squats and hack squats and leg extensions to make up that 15 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. Some of you may be wondering about a German volume training approach or a very high volume approach where you're doing, for example, 10 sets of 10 within a workout. That's an approach that actually doesn't tend to produce better results. If we look at the research, 5 sets of 10 actually tends to produce better results than 10 sets of 10, again, in non-enhanced lifters. That's because we tend to see a more plateaued muscle protein response after about 5 hard working sets per training session. I think you could push to 5 to 8 and be okay, but once you're starting to get over 10 working sets, we actually see that response start to decrease and get less of a training effect and have more fatigue that we're carrying to the next training session, potentially impacting our intensity of subsequent training sessions. This is why I tend to divide up training to 5 to 8 hard working sets per training session and then spread it out throughout the week to hit your total of around 15. If you're interested in seeing what a full 7-day program for a hypertrophy phase looks like, you can actually download that in the description below. I just released a 12-week strength and hypertrophy program, and when you click the link to say that you're interested, it automatically sends you the first 7 days of the program for free. Okay, so that was all phase 1 in our approach to hypertrophy specific training. What about phase 2, where we're focused on strength? In this phase, we're trying to target a more moderate volume. I tend to approach this with around 10 to 15 sets per muscle group per week. 8 to 10 sets per muscle group per week tends to be more of a maintenance stimulus for most people. And then if you get to that 10 to 12 to 14 sets per muscle group per week, that tends to be a really good volume for pushing strength gains. You really don't have to believe me on any of this though. I would really encourage you guys to test this yourself. For example, within my program, we're testing 5 rep max on week 1, week 6, and week 12, and we're just gonna measure how people respond. There are some objective truths to strength and conditioning principles, so if you align volume intensity and choose good exercises, you're probably gonna get similar results to what we see from research and what we've seen from training other athletes. So I would expect a good response increasing 5 rep max with this program. But if you want to try 25 sets per week for strength, or if you want to try training 7 days a week for bench press, you could try it. Just test your 5 rep max and see if it's actually improving. You may find out that training 3 times a week actually gives you more gains in your bench press than training 7 times a week. Personally though, the approach that I take in a strength phase is setting an appropriate training volume and then progressing intensity from week to week, focusing on adding load to the barbell. So the previous hypertrophy training block sets you up to be able to respond to a high volume of training. So now when we decrease that volume, your body will feel a little bit more fresh, a little bit less fatigued. So that way week to week, we can start really loading pounds on the barbell. Strength is a very force-based adaptation, so we do need to be adding weight week to week, whether we're doing that through percent 1 rep max or whether we're doing that through RPE. We just want the lifter to be choosing to use heavier and heavier weights from week to week. Personally, I do this with RPE. So in the first week of the strength phase, the priority is to introduce new movements at a relatively low RPE of 6, 7, maybe 7.5. It's still going to be a good stimulus because it's new strength movements that the athlete hasn't done before. You don't need to push to 8, 9, 10 RPE right week 1 in the intro week. I've seen too many times that pushing too hard in the intro week is just building more fatigue than you really need. It's really in the second, third, and fourth week of a strength phase where you're going to start to add weight to the barbell, and that is progressive overload. That's how we actually get stronger. Throughout the entire 4 weeks of a strength training block, I would recommend only probably taking 1 to 5 sets to true failure. I think it's a good idea because you do want to test. So for example, in week 6, we have some 10 RPE sets to test your 5 rep max and see how's your 5 rep max in this strength block versus 6 weeks ago. But there's really no reason to take every set to failure. This is actually something that Jeff Nippert and Lane Norton brought up in a recent video, and there's some enhanced lifters in the comments that just can't wrap their minds around how some people don't train to failure with drop sets every single week. But I would just encourage you, if you just always use drop sets and always train to failure, and you're like, it works for me, I added 5 pounds to my bench press last year, maybe try a different approach, measure, and see if it's actually better or worse than the approach that you've been taking. Anyway, I think it's good to take some sets to failure so you actually know what true failure actually looks like, and maybe that's going to show you that your RPE 8 was actually closer to an RPE 6. So it is important to take a few sets to failure to see where you're at, but you want to do it strategically and not every single training session. All right, lastly, let's move on to phase 3, the undulating phase. And I think this is a really cool phase of training, and a lot of people will really enjoy this type of training. Specifically, I recommend the daily undulating approach, where we're doing, for example, a power day on Monday, a strength day on Wednesday, and a hypertrophy training specific day on Friday. This is a really cool way to train where we're training multiple qualities at the same time. There's a lot of research to show that we can produce similar strength and hypertrophy gains from an undulating approach as we get from a linear approach. Honestly, this is just what it sounds like. The power day is going to be low volume, 2 sets of 3, 1 set of 4, 3 sets of 6, 4 sets of 2. A lot of those types of sets and reps where we're really focused on moving the bar fast and getting power. Our strength training specific session will involve more moderate intensity, heavy loads, and our hypertrophy day will have higher volume, more moderate loads. I think this is an especially good training approach for athletes who have a long season and they need to maintain multiple adaptations. If you're trying to peak for one specific event, like a powerlifting competition, or even peaking for the high jump for one competition that's really important to you for that year, you may take a linear approach and focus on only power training or only powerlifting specific strength training leading up to your one primary competition. But that's not how a lot of people train. A lot of the athletes who are going to sign up for my strength and hypertrophy program are going to want to be pushing strength and hypertrophy for a few months of their training year. They don't need to peak for a powerlifting competition. They don't need to peak for one specific event. Instead, they're just generally trying to build more strength and size over a certain period of time. In that case, undulating works really well. If you've never tried this training approach, I would really encourage you to try it and again, measure your progress and see what that actually looks like and see how you feel training too. A lot of people feel like this training approach keeps them really fresh and feeling good. If you're interested in using this 3-phase approach yourself, you certainly can and you can make your own program. But if you want to see exactly how I do it, I made the program really affordable. It's in the description below. It's a 12-week strength hypertrophy program where you'll get 4 weeks of training for hypertrophy, 4 weeks of training that's a bit more focused on strength, and then 4 weeks of an undulating approach. I think if you do the program, you're going to see really good improvements to your 5-rep max strength. We also strategically incorporated functional and mobility training to make sure that you're not just increasing strength and hypertrophy, but you're also getting more mobility and functional strength as well. Lastly, we incorporated 2 conditioning days into the training. So you have an aerobic conditioning day and an anaerobic conditioning day. This makes sure that you're not just building strength like a powerlifter where you're going to be able to do 1 or 2 things really well, but not walk up the stairs. But instead, you're doing a strength and hypertrophy program that is good for an athlete to build their conditioning, their mobility, and their strength and hypertrophy with good structured programming. If that sounds like something you could benefit from, you can check it out in the description below. You'll sign up and then you'll get it on an app called the Train Heroic app. Then you can just take that app with you to the gym. And then as soon as you walk in the gym, you just open the app and you know exactly what you need to do for your training session for that day. Because you made it all the way to the end of the video, I'll also give you a discount code MOVEMENT20 where you can get 20% off of the program. So head to the link in the description below whether you want to sign up for the full program or just download 7 days for free. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.